welcome to TiEcon Resurgence. I am Akriti Bhargav, your host for the session today. And we have a very special guest with us today, who is a pioneering force in Indian higher education. Please welcome with me Pramath Sinha. Pramath is the founder and chairman of Harappa Education, which strives to become India's largest online institution focused on teaching habits and skills critical to workplace success in the 21st century. Academics are his first love. And Pramath has built institutions that create leaders, including Ashoka University and ISB. Entrepreneurs, like you and me, we struggle a lot looking for leaders, evaluating people. How do you judge? What are the dimensions of leadership? Pramath today will share with us what he does to evaluate leaders. Over to you, Pramath.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Akriti, and it's great to be here. I would like to share with you some personal perspectives on how I look at leaders when I recruit, when I evaluate, and when I judge people's performance as leaders. I find this is also a personal perspective on how I view my own leadership and how I have evolved as a leader over the years. Let me share with you some ideas and some perspectives on how this whole journey of studying leadership and coming up with ideas on leadership started. So, through my 20s, I was mostly studying. I went on to do a PhD, and most of my work was around making individual contributions. I think I'd been in leadership roles in extracurricular activities at school and college, but I'd never really thought about what constitutes good leadership. I then I made a big switch from academia, which was really about making individual contributions, to join the consulting firm McKinsey & Company. And I worked there for almost 13 years. In the initial years, again, it was really about doing what was assigned to you. And you worked on projects, you did your piece of the work that the leader of your team assigned to you. But slowly but surely, as you progress through the corporate world, you are assigned to work on bigger and bigger things where you have to manage people, and you are now starting to be called a team leader. And then as you grow more senior, people start saying, well, what is this person's leadership style? What is this person's ability to lead even bigger and greater things? And what is this person's leadership potential? So I would often be evaluated and given this feedback. And I said, what does it mean to evaluate somebody's leadership? Can leadership even be measured? And I was all very confused because people would give me all kinds of feedback and advice on guidance on how to be a better leader. And it was not clear to me at all what was the best way to go about being a better leader. Or even as a baseline, how do you establish somebody's leadership? So I decided that I would read about leadership, because wherever you look, and now there's even a lot more on the internet, but in those days I'm talking about, roughly 25 years ago or 20 years ago. So there were lots of books, lots and lots of books written about leadership. And as I read more and more and more books, I got more and more confused. And I found that people had described leadership in terms of lots of attributes. So they would say, a leader is visionary. A leader has to be charismatic. A leader has to be a great communicator. A leader has to be a good leader of people. A leader has to motivate people. And if you put any group of people together and ask them what is leadership or what do they see in a leader, you'll end up with, a list of about 100 attributes. Now, if you look at those list of attributes, you suddenly start saying, hey, I cannot be all these people. How can one person do all these things? So if I had a choice to pick a few things from this list to become or to be, what would those few things be? So again, you try to narrow it down and it kind of becomes difficult. How do you take a long list and say, there was one attribute that a leader should have. What is that attribute? And honestly, I was not able to answer this question. Everybody you ask would come up with a different attribute. So then, of course, I tried to think about it some more and I said, okay, as I went through the thinking around it and the reading around it, I realized that at some point it came to me that you can't decide whether you are a leader. Who decides you are a leader? It's actually other people who decide whether you are a leader or not. People who have experienced you in action, people who have worked under you, people who have worked with you. And of course, for people who are more famous, people who you can watch their journey or watch their activity and watch what they do and then decide. So this was the first big realization that if you want to really study leadership, then what you need to do is understand how people are going to evaluate in general leadership. So now how do you go about understanding that? And again, you run into the same problem because if you ask 10 people, they will tell you they look at leadership in 10 different ways. So I said, this is becoming too complicated and I have to find another way to crack this problem. So I started studying how people decide whether somebody who is very well known, whether that person is a leader or not. And so I started looking at corporate leaders, political leaders, leaders in sports, and so on. Now that started to give me some insights, though what I'm going to talk about in this masterclass is not about just those leaders and not just evaluating celebrities, but really evaluating people in your company and evaluating yourself. But I think there are some learnings from there. So let me give you an example. Let's look at cricket. Now, I'm not too familiar with the personalities that are playing cricket today, but to quiz you on those. But let's say a few years ago, you had to pick between Sachin Tendulkar and Mahendra Singh Dhoni. Now, in most audiences, when I ask the question, who is the better leader? Unanimously, the answer is Mahendra Singh Dhoni. Now, we don't even know these people. We have never met them. We have not played cricket with them. We don't know them as individuals. Yet, sitting in our own perches without actually being there, we are quick to make the conclusion that Dhoni is a better leader than Tendulkar. A starker example is that if you ask people, who's a better leader, Modi or Manmohan Singh, then politics aside, and I'm not getting into the politics of it, most people will say Modi and not Manmohan Singh. Now, why are people jumping to such a conclusion so easily, so simply? There's something that they are doing in evaluating. And my thesis is, and I realize this, and this is my first big takeaway for you in evaluating people, that people see you as a leader when you win. People see you as a leader when you achieve success. People see you as a leader when you achieve significant breakthrough performance. So it's not enough to just keep going on and doing things. It's not about activity. It's not even about the role. Manmohan Singh was a prime minister. Sachin Tendulkar also captained India. So just because he was captain doesn't make him a leader in people's eyes. Just because he was individually very talented and possibly one of the most talented cricketers ever also doesn't make him a leader in people's eyes. But what makes him a leader, what makes Dhoni a leader, is that of course he had talent, but he also won matches for India. Please, this is the perception. Now, this happens in real life and in our companies and in our startups as well. People look at us, people evaluate us in terms of how well can we claim to have achieved something. Now, this seems very transactional. And most of us would say, "Arey, what about values? He's a nice person. This is a great guy." Such wonderful things they have done. But the world is a harsh place. Ultimately, you are judged for your leadership on what you delivered. How much did you deliver? Was it a step change in performance? Was it something that was positive? Was it something that is sustained? It's not one quarter, but you are doing it quarter over quarter. So the same thing happens to employees. There are a lot of your employees who will talk a lot. They work very hard. They will indulge in a lot of activity. They will set up processes. But ultimately, nothing will come out of their work. We all have such employees. We have such friends. We have worked with such people. That despite everything, they somehow are not able to get the job done. And of course, many times people fail. That's fine too. Many times it's outside circumstances because of which people fail. And that's fine too. But it's also true that in those situations, the world is a harsh place. It doesn't look for reasons. It doesn't look for underlying causes. It says, listen, this was not a leadership moment for you. Let me give you my own example. When Akriti introduced me, she said, I'm a pioneer in higher education. I set up ISB, I set up Ashoka. But the truth of the matter is that I also set up two other institutions between ISB and Ashoka, which both failed, sank without trace. Now, the fact is that I'm not known for that leadership. And the students who went to those two institutions, the faculty who were associated with that, my board members who were associated with that, the parents of the students who were associated with that, don't see me as a leader as far as their context was concerned. In their context, I was a failure. I did not deliver. I was not able to achieve. And so this brings me to my second point, that just because somebody has delivered breakthrough performance before doesn't mean that they will be able to deliver it again and again and again. And in that sense, leadership is contextual to a situation. And as the context changes, your ability to show leadership changes as well. And this again happens very often, because when you recruit somebody based on a resume, I was just recruiting today for a product manager. Now, because the product manager was very successful in another industry, yes, there is potential that he will also succeed for us. So he was in the ride hailing business, for example. But I run an edtech company. Now, he has the skills and he has shown great leadership there. He has shown achievement there. He has shown performance there, exactly the things I'm talking about. But the truth of the matter is that I should not assume that he will also deliver in this context. Forget about different context. I gave you the example. Within education itself, I started an institution, took that model, tried to replicate it, failed. Tried another thing, failed. So leadership becomes contextual, and we should not assume when evaluating leaders that just because they have led before or been successful in delivering before, that they will deliver each time. That doesn't mean that you don't trust them. That way you won't be able to hire anybody, right? You won't be able to evaluate anybody if you think, oh, they did it once, they can't do it again. I'm not suggesting that either, but I'm suggesting that when you evaluate and you judge people and you hire people, by all means pay attention to their past achievements, but also have a healthy skepticism about whether they will succeed in their new role. And that also have a positive view, but while you be optimistic, realize that you may have to help and support them in being successful again, because the odds are that they will not succeed in the same situation. So my first point is that leadership is about leading performance. And this leading of performance, delivering, step change, is a necessary condition for leadership. If you don't have this, people don't see you as a leader. By the way, one last thing on this point, and I have two other points to make quickly. I use this in my interviews. I use this in my interviews for admissions to universities. I use these in my interviews to hire people. You know how people will always describe all the things they did, all their positions, all the wonderful projects, activities. But really digging deep inside and saying, okay, you did this project. What did you do? What was the outcome? Sometimes people write, had this impact, that impact. But even there, that's not enough. What was your contribution? And how was this contribution different? How was this outcome different? Again, a very simple example is students will come to you with resumes saying, I was the president of the debating society. Well, your college existed for 70 years. What did you do as the president of the debating society that was different from all the previous 70 presidents of the debating society? Is there something distinctive that you did? Is there something that you delivered that was way above and beyond somebody else? Did you come up with a new idea, implemented it and deliver it? Did you just talk about it, or did you actually do it? So I think this aspect of, before you declare somebody a leader, make sure that you evaluate them on their performance. And by the way, I do think that Sachin Tendulkar was also a leader, but the context you have to evaluate him in is not whether he won matches for India, but what he did for Indian cricket. And if you saw that, and he had breakthrough success and achievement, because if you see the current generation of young cricketers, Sachin was such an inspiration to all of these cricketers that he would be seen to be a leader when it came to the context of creating many, many successful cricketers and many high quality, capable cricketers in this, high talented cricketers in this country. So leadership also has to be, like I said, measured in context, and the same person can be a leader in one context and not a leader in another context. By my definition, all mothers are leaders. The fact that they have got us to become full-blown human beings who have gone out into the world and survived is in itself a big achievement for any parent, mother or father, that you bring somebody into the world, you nurture them, you educate them, you then release them into the world as a complete human being so that they can live independently. It's a leadership moment. It's a leadership achievement as well. So I like to measure the performance in the context. And I also think that measurement should be not that you built a country or you are prime minister or that you built universities, but really in any context, any small, it could be in your family, your community, your village, or your startup. Or you could be a CTO in a startup or the first employee in the startup, or you could be the office boy in the startup. So that's the first point about leadership, and this is the necessary condition. A lot of people cringe when I say that it's only about performance because it seems like I'm disregarding everything else. That's not true. I'm only saying that this is the most important and the necessary condition. You can be everything else. Remember how I started by saying that there are 100 things that you can be? If you had to pick one thing that you have to be, that one thing is you have to deliver. Now, there are two other things that I want to also add to this. These are also conditions that allow us to evaluate people's leadership. And these are now required as sufficient conditions for leadership. If you don't have these, then you are not sufficient as a leader. First one is the ability to work with people. Now, this we all know. The world has changed, and today in the workplace, in the startup, jerks are not tolerated as leaders. People who are not people, people who are difficult, people who have rough edges, people who shout, scream, get angry, people who are very hierarchical, people who don't listen, people who are not empathetic, people who demonstrate bad, inconsistent behavior. Most people don't like them because they feel that they're not respected. It hurts their dignity. And as long as you have people, even with the best achievement, like I said, if you deliver, which is the necessary condition on performance, but if you are a jerk, if you are a very difficult person to work with, people will say, yeah, he's great, but I don't want to ever work with this person again. And that's the surest sign that you will not be seen to be leading. This is an easy one to evaluate. In your company, you'll be seeing bad behavior. Your employees, you can easily do skip level feedback, gather feedback about people, and know whether the person is seen to be treating people with respect or not. The more evolved people leaders, though, which is the positive side, just as you deliver breakthrough on performance, the breakthrough on the people side is that these real leadership is leaders who make other people successful, who enhance the leadership of other people. And that's what people who work with you expect of you in a leadership role. And again, this is something that you have to constantly evaluate about the people who work with you and the and your own leadership. Are you demonstrating people leadership or not? So this is the second and the sufficient condition for leadership. And the last condition, and this is something that others don't judge, only you know, is that to be a leader and to genuinely, as I said, to deliver in different contexts, you have to be able to lead yourself. It's almost like you are your current self, your past self, and your future self. And your current self has to look at your past self and say, okay, these are all the things that Pramath is. But with this, Pramath will not be successful as in terms of delivering performance, in terms of leading people in the future Pramath. So I have to tell the past Pramath that, hey, you need to build these skills, you need to grow in these ways, you need to change in these ways if you're going to be successful in the future. What this means is that you have to be very self-aware. You will need to be aware of the past and the future and the present Pramath. What it means is that you have to be willing to take feedback from people to understand, Akriti, what do you think of me? Anand man, what do you think of me? And understand that and be able to absorb that. And then be able to constantly use that feedback to improve yourself, grow yourself, iron out your wrinkles, improve your areas where you are not so great, and build on your strengths, and constantly keep yourself motivated to be able to do that, because the hardest thing is to change yourself. The hardest thing is to grow yourself. And honestly, unless some other leader is taking responsibility to take you on that path, as you grow more and more senior, you have to take responsibility. And by the way, if you are not going to change yourself, then what right do you have to ask somebody else? So if you are playing a leadership role in your team, how will you get performance out of others if you are asking them to change and you are not changing yourself? So the third aspect of leadership that becomes very important is the aspect of leading self. So coming back to the topic of the day, how do you evaluate leaders? To me, there are three dimensions to it. To evaluate people's ability to lead performance, somebody's ability to lead people, and third, their ability to lead self, lead themselves. These three come together to decide whether you are a leader or not. The first two are very visible to the outside world. To some extent, the third is also visible. You know how we sometimes say, my God, my friend has grown so much. He could hardly talk. Now he's become articulate. Or when he was in school, I never expected that he would be able to achieve all of these things. He was really bad at his studies. But look, if you look at how he's doing today, obviously this person, these are examples of people who've really changed. So you can look at lead self also and evaluate that. One of the ways to judge that in an interview situation when you don't know somebody is to say, hey, what is the most difficult challenge you've ever faced and how did you overcome it? Remember, people ask this question. They're really evaluating you on lead self. What are the biggest challenge you personally faced that you had to overcome? What is your biggest success? What did you learn from your mistakes? These are all self-awareness, lead self questions. So you can see in any evaluation scenario, whether it is interviewing, whether it is judging somebody's performance who's working for you right now, whether it is judging your own performance, you can use these three dimensions and ask questions around these three dimensions to really judge somebody's overall performance as a leader. And I call it the authentic model for leadership. And the reason I call it that is because you have no right to be called a leader, nor do you have a right to call somebody a leader until they are authentic, that they are real on all three. That one, they have delivered performance, they have delivered on something. Two, that they are truly good with people and they have earned the respect of people. In the first case, they've delivered real tangible results. In the second case, there are people who swear by them. And third, it is authentic because everybody's leading self is a very authentic. It's very particular to each one of us. Each one of us has our own signature, strengths, weaknesses, our own level of self-awareness, and it's again very authentic to you. So I think like to call it the authentic model of leadership because it's based on these three parameters. So anyway, I hope that was helpful. I wanted to share something that I use myself. I don't know if it came out as too conceptual. It is hard to convey this in a virtual mode when you are not seeing the audience, nor do you have any slides or you can't see people's reactions. But I hope I also tried to make it a little bit practical. But I'm happy to do more of that in the time we have. If Akriti can ask me some questions, or if the audience has questions, they can put it in the chat box and Akriti will relate to me. Akriti, over to you if you're still here.
Thank you, Pramath. That was a great, very insightful session. We heard about context. We heard about, leading self. I have a few questions which I'm going to put up to you. When you're growing a company globally, right, and you have no cultural context, you do not know what the country is about, and you start expanding and start founders, when they are in India is such a diverse country, we're hiring in different states. How do we learn to get more context and evaluate leaders in cultural context? Is cultural context important? Yeah.
Yes, Akriti, cultural context is important. I think it's very important to understand the cultural context. In fact, I've also used this model to talk to people about how do you deal with cultural diversity. And it applies not just to geographical diversity or cultural diversity, but it also applies to diversity of thinking, right? I told you when I joined McKinsey, I was an engineer with a PhD. I didn't have an MBA. So there was diversity in the fact that I had a very different educational background from the rest of the people. Sometimes there's a diversity in the fact that, I was older, so I used to think differently. I used to react to people problems very differently because I had seen conflicts, so I knew how to deal with conflicts. There was also diversity by the fact that I was the youngest in my family, so I was very introverted and I wouldn't speak very much in public settings. Whereas others, especially people who came from good colleges and had a education where they were very confident, would not hesitate to speak. So diversity comes in many hues and colors, including the diversity that you talked about. So understanding that context is very important. In the example that you mentioned, it's not just understanding Germany or understanding South India. It's actually understanding the people from there who are working with you, right? Or customers from there who you are trying to serve. And to do that, you have to have two things, which I talk about also in this context: empathy and curiosity. Now, empathy in this case doesn't mean sympathy or caring or concern. A lot of people take empathy to mean that, right? And it does mean that in other contexts. Here, empathy means, can you put yourself in the other person's shoes and understand where they are coming from? So, really being able to live in the other person's skin, that's empathy for you when you are understanding context. Second, the curiosity point is, it's not just understanding from a point of view that, oh, I'm doing business here, so I need to understand. It's also, you have to be genuinely curious. That somebody who comes from Germany, how do they think about decisions, right? I've heard so much about the German precision. So what does it mean? How does it reflect itself in daily life? Right? So you have to be curious. You have to be curious like you would be of something that is a hobby or a passion, right?
Right.
So you have to actually get into it that way. And the last thing I will say is that I have found that even with the most diverse backgrounds, there is some common ground. So if you're going to move forward and not create conflict out of diversity, which often happens, but truly create synergy and derive value from diversity, then you have to use the empathy and curiosity to identify what is that common ground that you can build from, because differences will always be there, but there are always commonalities as well. So the word cultural diversity often immediately triggers off all the differences. But if you really want to tackle the situation from a leadership perspective, like I said, in terms of driving performance or getting people to follow you, then very quickly you have to use your empathy and curiosity to understand the context and find what is the common ground from which we will build from. So those are some of the points I would say in going global or going into new markets that you have to leverage when you are building your leadership.
Understood. And you emphasized on a very important point there, which is empathy. I'm not sure if empathy is well understood, but maybe you can have a quick discussion around that as well. But I have a very interesting question before that. I mean, if we have time at the end, you can discuss empathy. But I have a very interesting question coming from Vikramjeet Singh. At what stage should you start working on coaching other people to be leaders within the company? And what do you do to build up the process? How do you go about it?
So, I mean, coaching is a whole field. I think everybody who is working in a leadership role or has the opportunity should be coaching others to be successful. That's my whole second point. Investing in people to make them more successful. There is no right time for it. You have to do it from day one. I think there's a lot. I don't know what Vikramjit means by the right time. Obviously, there are some initial years where, if you mean the time from the coachee or the employee perspective, then I think, coaching starts from day one, because, at that stage, it has to be an apprenticeship model. I think the world of business or the startup world or the corporate world has become very much about, hiring a bunch of individuals and letting them do things. I think that is where the missed opportunity is. I think it does require you to groom and coach people. So if you bring more experience, you should start coaching them from day one. You should set some time aside every week to take some time off and to understand, okay, so what was required of you? How well did you do? What worked? What didn't work? How do you strengthen what worked? How do you fix what didn't work? And here are my suggestions on how you should improve the things that didn't work. There are very standard coaching models which one should apply. One very famous coaching model that I use all the time is the skill-will matrix. You can very quickly judge people by talking to them, where they are on skill and where they are on will, and you easily get a 2x2. Obviously, you want everybody who's got high skill, high will. There you don't need to do much. You give them something, delegate, and they go off running and they deliver. With them, you don't need to do much coaching. You just need to give them more and more bigger and bigger challenges. That could be the best coaching for them. Then there are people who are low skill and low will. And of course, they need a lot of hand holding and a lot of investment of time and effort. Most likely, they will not survive in your company unless they really change. Either you invest in their skill or you invest in their will and get them into one of the other boxes. The interesting ones are the low skill, high will. These are people who have really gung-ho, really committed, but they actually don't have skills. Obviously, in their case, you have to invest in developing their skills, figure out what are the things they're doing, what skills they don't need. This is where learning, a lot of what we do at Harappa comes in here, is really developing people's skills, because they're very, very enthusiastic, very driven, very ambitious, but they don't know how to. And then, of course, the difficult ones are the high skill, low will ones. These are typically people who are bored. Right? They're very highly skilled, but they've been doing this all their life, or they've been stuck in one particular role. You don't want to move them because they do such a good job, but their motivation levels are going down. So there you have to find ways to motivate them, to give them some new things to feel good about, and so on. So I think there are tools and techniques out there, but coaching should start from day one. And you can't coach people all the time, every time. And, you are obviously very busy with the work also. But if you can take out some time to address a discussion using, say, the leadership framework around people's performance, their people skills, their their self-awareness, and then help them think through what their strengths and weaknesses are, give them some advice on how they can be better. That should be happening very regularly and periodically, and almost on in teams that work very closely, almost on a daily basis.
Right. Great. I think the skill will matrix would be a very interesting one for people to evaluate and see how they want to work with people. I have a question here. How do you overcome self-doubt? And this, I think, stems from the fact that, people grow pretty fast in startups. So how do they overcome self-doubt, whether they'd be able to do something or not? Or are they good?
Yeah, everybody suffers from self-doubt. And the more you stretch yourself, the more this whole notion of comfort zone, right? So I don't have a formula for this, but one way to think about it is that it's a little bit like, when you're scared of swimming or getting into the water or heights, or, it's the same thing. What happens, there are two things that can happen. One is, before I go to the swimming and heights, the first is that you end up having an imposter syndrome. So you're delivering, you are successful, but you're saying, oh my God, this cannot be me. I'm not ready for this. I didn't deserve it.
Yeah.
I'm not capable. So I think when you're doing that, I find that it's actually helpful there to actually to talk to some outsiders, talk to people, and really ask, how am I really doing? What am I doing right? Right? Get feedback. I think, the biggest thing about leadership that I didn't get a chance to talk about, and the leading self part, is that if there's one thing you want to do, is you want to constantly get feedback from other people. Because only other people can see you in the most objective way, and you have to give them the comfort that you are willing to hear their unvarnished feedback, because some of the feedback may not be pleasant. But equally, on the positive side, if people can tell you that, no, this is actually your strength, you're doing a good job, right? You just need to constantly hear that to get over the imposter syndrome. And also, if you are feeling like you are not doing certain things well, understanding that those are things that you're not doing well, and working on them, but acknowledging that the other things that you're doing are your strengths and you're doing them well. So sometimes hearing it from others fights this internal battle that you have with yourself, which is this imposter syndrome about whether you deserve your success or not. On the part about how do you develop confidence, I think you will always be a little bit underconfident, and it's okay to be a little bit underconfident, because overconfidence is not good either. The underconfidence really drives you and forces you. But confidence only comes from putting yourself through tests in life, right? When you first learn how to ride a bike, how do you get confident, right? You put yourself with. I remember that when I first rode a bike, I had those two trainer wheels on my back of my bike so that I wouldn't fall. So it has gave me the confidence ki chalo, if I am going to not be able to balance, I will at least not fall and hurt myself. Then you kind of learn, and then you take the trainer wheels off, and then you start riding the bike. So I think the same thing holds true in life as well. I think you're in your comfort zone. Comfort zone is, no, I'm not getting onto the bike. I remember I used to have a small car that my grandmother gave me. I was very comfortable in the car. In fact, I had outgrown the car, but I would still use the car, because in the car you couldn't fall. You didn't have to balance anything. Then so the only way to learn, or only way to build confidence, is to try out the bike. So you have to somewhere force yourself. Now, if you go straight to try the bike, that will put you not straight from the comfort zone into the terror zone. You'll never go there. It's like if anybody asks me to bungee jump, trust me, I will never bungee jump. It's my terror zone. But what you do is, when you put on the trainer wheels, you convert the terror zone into the learning zone. It's calculated risk. You're outside of the comfort zone. Now you're on a bike, but you are with some training wheels. So it's learning zone, and it's not the terror zone. Takes the terror away. So find opportunities constantly that are in the learning zone, that are not in the terror zone. People try to attempt the terror zone stuff. One day they'll say, okay, I'm going to lose weight, or I'm going to go bungee jumping, right? At least start going up to heights. Start jumping off a small cliff before you go bungee jumping. So I think that's the way to think about building confidence. I think not any amount of motivation doesn't do what just trying things out which are in your learning zone help you build.
So here's, thanks, Pramath. That is really helpful. I have one last question from the audience, and if you have more questions, please stream them in right now. How are people who are seen to be brash have built some very large companies and are seen great leaders.
I know, and there are many iconic examples. I think Steve Jobs was often accused of that. I can't take any other names because they are people whom we may know, and who. I think the issue really is that two things. One is that we may see them as brash, but the question is, do the people who work with them see them as brash? Some of them do, but a lot of people say, listen, despite being brash, these people were really caring people that they really cared about. They were very inspiring. I'm a follower. They may have been brash. That's a style issue that you have to accept. I have a mixed feeling about that. I think that the brashness sometimes can be, if the brashness becomes rude, or if the brashness undermines somebody's dignity, and if they don't show respect, then I don't think that can be condoned. So I think those types of leaders have in the recent past been thrown out. I mean, they did achieve a lot, but they also suffered from it. I think some of the examples we know about, right? I think at Uber, at WeWork, the CEOs paid a heavy price. Now, it is true that they achieved a certain level of greatness. By the way, when I often ask audiences of a young audience about, was Hitler a leader? A lot of people raise their hands, right? So the question really is not what the world thinks of them. I don't have an answer for the question. How do they succeed? The question is, what kind of leader do you want to be, and what kind of a leader do you want to respect, right? I would say that most of us don't like to work for truly brash people or people who are truly jerks, right? Some of them do get away. I think there will be the exceptions that prove the rule.
Great. I think we've not any more questions, but it has been a fabulous session, Pramath. We've had great insights, understanding of how to evaluate leaders and how to build a company. Thank you so much for such a wonderful session. And you've been a fabulous audience and great questions streaming in. Anand Mayan, you've been fantastic on interpreting each and every sentence. With that, we close the session. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And thank you, Anand, man. This is my first time that I had a session with somebody who was interpreting for me. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Just pleasure.
Thank you, Akriti.
Thank you.
Thank you.